I always forget. Hello, recording. Where am I going? Slideshow. Okay, can you guys see that? Yeah, okay. So this is a story of a trip that three people who are here on this talk, and you'll meet them very shortly, were on this trip in the Gates of Lodore, and it didn't go exactly the way they imagined it, but they made it through. They had the skills to complete the trip, and no one was killed and no one was injured, and like it worked out, but it wasn't easy. So we're going to just tell this story because it's common for us to hear about a fatality or a severe injury that happens on the river, but we often don't hear the stories of trips that are just difficult because maybe people are a little bit ashamed, or maybe people are, like they have different reasons for not wanting to talk about it, but they don't talk about it. And what we really need to do is get past that and talk about the trips that don't go very well so that we can all learn from it. And Lower Columbia Canoe Club, here are my guests. Debbie Hindy, I'm sure you guys have probably heard of Debbie because she's very vocal and involved with Poudre Paddlers as her club. Richard Ferguson is here, and he was the permit holder for the said trip. And Nick, how do you say your last name, Nick?
Cott.
Cott, not Coat. Cott. Nick Cott. He's the incoming safety chair for the Poudre Paddlers. And so he's developing a strong interest in these same kinds of questions as to how do you have a safe trip? What is, that's the goal. A safe trip is an enjoyable trip. That's like the foundation. And I borrowed quite a few slides from the last safety series presentation with Trip Kinney, because Trip went through his slides really fast and we didn't get to really soak in some of those messages. But this one, life unfolds when you care and repeats itself when you don't care, is very true. And we're all here because we care. Nick, this is for you.
All right, thanks. Hi, everybody. Nick Cott. So this slide is about what is post-mortem. And basically, it's, in our scenario, looking back at our trip and what could have gone better. So to put it in context and to reiterate, there are no dead bodies to speak of on this trip. So just want to be clear on that. If you're just logging in right now, let me be clear, no dead people. But looking back, basically, what were our errors and what are the corrections we could have made? So looking back, and then pre-mortem, this trip has good examples of the lack of pre-mortem, at least as a group. Perhaps as individuals, there were 8 of us on this trip. Individually, we might have been thinking ahead a little bit, but there was a real lack of dialogue on the trip. So a lack of pre-mortem for sure. And then intramortem, it's just kind of in the middle of it. So that's what this slide's about.
Yeah.
Next slide.
I'm trying. What are the goals?
The goals of pre-mortem. Well, basically, what can we do by looking back at our trip to learn? So as incoming safety chair for our paddle group in Colorado, and as a newer kayaker, this is my first assessment in hindsight of a trip. And so I have learned a lot over the past month kind of prepping for this. And it's a great example of just how much light you can shed on it when you really dive back into it and kind of rekindle some conversations with the people on your trip. So it's been really good. And my goal out of it is to just increase the odds of success, which is the last bullet point. I'll never forget about certain aspects of this trip, but it'll only make me more aware of other trips that these will apply. So yeah, that's it for that slide.
Oh yeah. So the near miss bit is kind of important. The American Whitewater is a national organization that has a online system that talks about all the rivers, and they also have an accident database. And in the accident database, they record fatalities especially, but they also have a section where they are trying to catalog near misses, and almost nobody reports near misses on their system. Like, it's almost empty. So this is just to say that perhaps if you've had a near miss and you're not too embarrassed and you're willing to talk about it, maybe you could tell AW about it, because they're collecting that data in order to help us all have safer trips in the future. And Richard was the permit holder.
Well, it was a club trip. There were 8 people on the trip and 6 boats. I'd been on Gates 3 times, and once before in a canoe. The flow was low-ish. There was definitely variable, and that was probably was an issue on this trip. It's a hard to get permit, and there's 4 big rapids, basically. And we're going to talk about this a little bit, but unfortunately, it was out of my control. The trip campsites that were assigned, the 4 big rapids were all on the same day. That is not the way I would have requested it. But anyway.
Right, but you had no choice. That's just what they gave you. Yeah. All right. So going into it, who goes matters. And something I learned after we made this slide was that you guys have permit parties, and that influences who goes. Yeah, but Nick.
So team selection, and once again, can't tell you how much I've learned about team selection. This is my 2nd season to actually be involved in some multi-day trips, and so the learning curve has been exponential on this, because I didn't have many reference points and didn't know etiquette and questions to ask people, and so what we've learned from this trip basically is, looking back, is if you don't paddle with them on a regular basis, and it's somebody that you're not too familiar with, then it just boils down to, what are your qualifications? So what are they? How long ago have you paddled, and this particular section possibly, and what are you used to paddling, and what types of groups, and what do you view as self-support, things like that, because, and I've learned about this default of truth, and it's so true. We automatically want to just assume the best in people. So that's not always the case, and you'll hear more about that later. But, and then as far as lessons go, so how do we implement like verification of people? And at the bottom there, you'll see some great ways to kind of initiate that and break the ice with people, as far as let's get together, or hey, show me pictures of your trip, or talking to people that are more familiar with that paddler's current state. And about this trip specifically, I had just heard through the pipeline about a paddler that from a long time ago was really a strong paddler, but I hadn't paddled with him yet to that point, and being a great paddler a long time ago and current day could be a real big difference. So can't just assume.
This is true. And something that kind of goes along with this slide, Nick, is an email I just got from Kent Ford, who many people will recognize the name. And Kent Ford said that when you're doing your team selection, you might want to inquire about people's medicine, because he's had experiences and heard about trips where people went off of their mood stabilizing drugs, thinking that on a trip would be a great time to do that. And it might not be a good time to go off your meds.
Steve, Kent Ford was just mentioned. Kent Ford was just mentioned.
Yes, he was. Am I doing this slide? I can. The question, will this person cause problems? This is something that Richard said. This is his exact phrase. Will this person cause problems? And he asked this question because he's noticed that the people you don't know are usually the ones that cause an unexpected challenge, right? So in this case, there was a person that caused problems, and not all of these things are directly from that person, but we're starting to see that there might be a personality type of a person that would be problematic on most trips. And it has to do, I think, with, perhaps a personal history that causes them to be traumatized and insecure. At any rate, when you get a person who has the problems of not being a good communicator and being very insecure and having to be self-promoting in order to feel qualified, you might have a problem. And I'll just let you guys read some of this. But when a person is condescending and talks bad about other people, that's definitely a very bad sign. Yeah. This crew was not that bad. Like, there are a lot of very great people on this group, but oh yeah, Debbie, we haven't even heard from you yet.
Glad to jump in. Hi all, I'm Debbie. So as you heard, there were 8 of us, and 4 of us had paddled together on several self-supported multi-day trips. We were familiar with how we packed and what we brought. And just, if you love stereotypes, 3 of us were engineers. Thank goodness one of us was not.
I liked your joke about bringing along a counselor for one to balance out each engineer.
Yes. We had 4, we're calling relative newcomers on this trip because we each knew them in some way, but one of them was Jesse, whose name has changed. And Jesse had a very well-known reputation as an experienced whitewater canoeist. Both Richard and I had paddled with Jesse on a class 3 river a couple of times, just easy, simple day trips. And Jesse lived on a popular river and paddled it a lot in their solo open boat. So that was what we knew about Jesse. And Nick, who's here on this talk, Nick Cott, I've known Nick, and Richard has too. We both paddled with him on our local Poudre River. And Nick had done a multi-day trip with Richard on the San Juan. Nick was in a cataract, which is the same cataract that came on this trip under a different rower. Nick was in his hardshell kayak for this trip. And as you heard already, Nick is very interested in safety. And then on the cataract was Barry and his passenger. And his passenger was not an experienced whitewater passenger. They were new to it, but they had a great attitude and gung-ho capability. Barry did all the rowing, and the cataract was new to Barry, and I think Nick is going to talk more about some issues with the cataract later. Barry was very familiar with Gates of Lodore. He'd run it more than anybody else in the group. I think Richard had done it a few times, couple times. This was my first time. And then Barry was known to have been a hard water kayaker in the past, and he's rowed a while, but not in this cataract. So next slide. So when you get to the Gates of Lodore, there's no turning back. Once you get launched, there is no takeout until the end. So there you are, you're with your group and you're in this section of river. Next slide. So we had one boat, we had 3 canoes, 3 solo canoes on this trip. One inflatable kayak, the one cataract, and the one hard shell kayak. And one of the solos was a well-loaded tandem canoe paddled solo. It's an Esquif Pocket Canyon. If you're familiar with these, it's made of T4Mex. It weighs about 59 pounds and it's 14.5 feet long. To put that in context, my self-support multi-day whitewater boat is 12 feet long. Richard's is 13.5 feet long, and this one is 14.5 feet long. So, and it is designed as a tandem. It has 2 seats That's why it has such a big gear capacity. It can hold up to 770 pounds of gear. And I think it's a little enticing when you're the paddler of a big boat to bring some extra stuff. Now, Jesse did not bring anywhere near 770 pounds of gear, but
Thank
they
goodness.
did make some choices to bring some heavy equipment and maybe a little extra. And their attitude, there were some issues, some strife along the way, and we're going to talk in more detail about that. So put all those factors together.
Mhm. Here's a picture of the boat.
Yeah, better picture of the Skiff Pocket Canyon. It's a sweet boat.
It's really
And-
wide, was my
Yeah,
remark.
it's a sweet whitewater boat, but it is designed as a small tandem.
Mhm.
Okay, so day one was an easy day. I think, Richard, I think you're next up.
Okay, well, it was a very short day. It was kind of an oddly short day, but it was a nice camp. We started to see some friction at that point that was some, I don't know, some issue that I'm not even sure we ever really understood, but Jay was not happy about thinking that, well, we said self-supported, but it was like Jay had a different vision of self-supported. So, we talked about the issue of, well, do we have sand mats? And yeah, that for rafts, that makes a lot of sense. But when everybody's cooking individually and most people are running freeze-dried meals, it just doesn't, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So that became an issue. And again, Jay was saying that somehow Jay didn't get the memo about self-support, but it was pretty clear, but oh well. So then we have an issue there. So we're starting off really with first night with some friction and I think we probably should have talked more about the next day challenges, but that did not happen. That happened in a kind of a limited way. I'm not sure I remember how much detail talk there was before we launched on day 2.
Mhm. Here's what you might have seen if you were looking at the guidebook about the next day.
Yep.
That description, upper disaster falls and then lower disaster falls. It starts with hug the left shore as you pass to avoid an inadvertent trip down the channel on the right side of the island. This channel slams into an undercut in the cliff on River Right and should be studiously avoided. And that studiously avoidance that's what didn't happen. The rest of it went just like normal. So, this is me jumping in to say that when you are with a group and people aren't talking about something and maybe there's a little tension and maybe it's a little awkward, CUS, and it's not about cussing, it's about concerned, uncomfortable, and safety. That's what CUS stands for. And so I'm concerned is the first thing you say. And if it doesn't get you anywhere, then you escalate to I'm uncomfortable that, we're doing it this way. And then if you really have to go the next step and explain why it's a safety issue, you can. But if you do those 3 things in a row, people will get it. And this is something that's borrowed from nursing and surgery and healthcare. But I think it works in the paddling world too. And the earlier you speak up about things that concern you or make you uncomfortable, the more likely you are to maybe stimulate a conversation. Nick, are you muted?
Okay, sorry about that.
right.
Day 2. So this was the day of our first real incident. So it didn't start out too early. We actually had a really big day ahead of us and we got a late start, which did not help. And late starts can be common in the beginning of a trip. As you're kind of dialing all your gear in and rigging and camp and whatnot. But also if you have unfamiliar boat or unfamiliar gear, and you'll see how that applies possibly for late start too. We wanted to get off earlier, 8 to 9, I think, when Richard wanted to leave, but we didn't leave till 10 or after. So that didn't help. And then we did get 4 miles of some pretty mild paddling before we got to the upper section of disaster. So, which we did scout. Part of the issue with the cataract was that, the seat was too low for the boatman, and then the seat for the passenger at the front was actually too high. And that was kind of a post-mortem lesson for sure. And it was a really heavy raft too, overloaded, as we came to find out. So, so the raft was the last to actually leave the beach. So our incident of that day to, like I said, we did scout the upper section. The problem was that the lower lower disaster, there's not a lot of space between upper and lower, and we did not stop for lower, nor did we regroup.
And you guys scouted from river left?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So, so where was I know the canoes were ahead of me, and everybody studiously stayed to the left of the cobble island, as they should have. But I was kind of bouncing around like a bumblebee, just playing, and I ended up in the right channel to the right of the cobble bar, and saw the wall and saw the severity of it. And just, even though I was in the right channel, in my kayak, I was able to just keep to the left side and move past it all. But the raft, which was behind me, also ended up in the same channel. And you'll see an aerial photo of this, but basically once he was in the deeper, faster water, there was no getting back to the left, especially with the cobble. It's a submerged cobble island, so he's just in the wrong place at the wrong time for sure. And once the water grabbed him, back paddling wasn't effective at all. And so the cataract was slammed into an undercut wall, which pretty much, I think, had a 45-degree face to it. So it's a really bad spot to be. And hit it almost parallel, and the bow hit first, and the passenger in the front was kind of pushed down between the pontoons, and then the captain was actually ejected kind of out the stern, and the boat continued to be pushed up under the undercut. And it's kind of unclear because we have a couple perspectives on this, but the water built up so much upriver of the pontoons that the boat actually submerged, from what I remember, but then popped itself back out upright. And the captain was, washed down river, but the passenger in the front was able to, grab the raft and kind of ride down with it until it caught an eddy. And then and so they were definitely knocked really hard, and they're thrown overboard. And it all happened really fast, but it was very scary. So the aerial photo, you can see right where it says Green River, just to the left of the word green, you can see it's a large size of submerged cobble bar there on the island in the middle. And it's the
Can
undercut.
you guys see my mouse?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is where the current slides from river left to river right. Oh,
Mhm.
shoot. I don't know how to go back either. Oh, there we go. I think this is where it slides, and then this is the undercut wall, and this is the little skinny channel coming out the bottom. Could that be possibly right, Nick?
Yeah, that's just how undercut it is, because you can't see the water that's actually to the river right of the Cobble Island, because that's how much of a
Yeah,
of a
so the
slope
water
face
goes
that is.
under this cliff.
Yes.
And I found video of it. I've got a link to that video at the end, but I'm not going to show it now. But it's pretty gnarly. It's a really deep undercut.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is another one of Tripp's slides from last time. He mentioned all of the major killers, and undercuts are like fifth in terms of dangerousness, but 13% of fatalities are associated with undercuts. So we need to pay attention when there's an undercut wall, for sure. And here's the aftermath. The bent ore look all introverted.
So looking back, our postmortem lesson was, why did the cat end up there? And, again, there was not a lot of time between the upper and lower section. Again, Barry, who has run this more than a dozen times, Lodore section, I mean, is very aware of that wall, and you don't want to be on the right side. But in between a newish boat and the seating, and he just kind of messed up. So he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I, in front of him, was oblivious to kind of the wall coming up and taking the right channel, and should have been more aware, for sure. But ways this could have been prevented. At the bottom there, you'll see map review and discussion. And looking back, we should have discussed this at Camp 1 the night of, or the morning, that morning of day 2. And in my opinion, we should have had a lead boat stop at the lower disaster scout spot to at least not only possibly discuss, but to at least do some signaling, just to give people some reference points. So,
and it'll happen the next time.
Yes, it will.
And then we get to Camp 2.
Well, we'd gone about 8 miles, and our assigned camp was further downriver, but the group was tired. It was getting late in the day. Barry definitely did not want to row the Crux Rapid Hell's Half Mile that day. So I just made the call. It wasn't a decision that everybody was happy with, but to me, it was a very easy decision. People were tired. It was late in the day. Let's stop. So that was an issue of conflict for some people, that they were concerned we were at a camp that was not assigned. We were illegally camping. They were worried that another trip would come in and try to kick us out of the campsite. Didn't happen, but it was just an additional source of conflict.
All right, so that camp that we picked was right at the top of Triplet Falls, the next class 3 rapid. The third of the rapids we were supposed to have done the previous day. And as Richard said, there was a lot of tension about where we were camped, and you can walk, there's a trail down from the top of Triplet Falls to go down and scout the falls, which we did. And we were grateful that nobody showed up in that camp. And so we had a good night's sleep, and we got up and we actually scouted the falls again that morning. And I particularly remember having a whole different perspective on the rapid that morning. I was so grateful that I decided, and we went down and scouted it again, because the lines looked much more obvious to me. I was able to break it into 3 distinct sections and know the moves I needed to do. So things were looking fairly good in the morning. We were getting over the strife that we had. And so we made it the plan. You have to go single file through the rapid, and we decided that the raft and the IK and the kayak were going to go first, and the 3 canoes second. And the raft, IK, and kayak went through. I think Nick went ahead of the cat again, giving them the line to take. And there's a big pool down at the bottom on River Left where they were waiting for us. So if there was any accidents or safety needs, I think, Nick, you even stopped a little above that eddy so that we had safety set up. And so when we 3 canoes got together to go, we decided on our order, and it was going to be myself and then Richard and then Jesse. And so I started down, and I didn't realize it. Richard caught that Jesse was upset, and we believe it had something to do with that the other boats had already gone, but it was the plan.
Let me pitch in here for a second.
Yeah.
In terms of thinking about what could have been done better, I probably or maybe should have just called a timeout. Now, that's hard to do when you're behind schedule. But maybe I should have done that, because I did know she said that she was Jesse said that they were upset. So so perhaps I should have called a timeout at that point. Give Jesse a little more time to get their head on straight. But in any event, I believe that the primary reason the second accident happened was really just not having their head on straight. And you're going into class 3 rapid, you need to not be thinking about a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we do talk about that a little bit more further down in these slides, but absolutely, it's a call. And then, the other people are down at the bottom, and they're waiting and waiting and waiting, and what's going through their heads. But anyway, that happened anyway, that we're about to get into. So actually go back one, Teresa, thank you. So at the top of this rapid, there's a fairly easy rock garden, and Jesse was last and didn't see a rock in that top section and wrapped their canoe. And Jesse got out and got to shore just fine. But give me the next slide and we'll get into that. So I'm down at the bottom. The rest of us are all down at the bottom. Here comes Richard through the bottom part of Triplet Falls. The picture is taken from the big eddy on River Left. So it's really a straight shot at the end. And then there's no Jesse. So next slide. So now we're back up at the top, and Teresa, if you can take your cursor and point out where the boat is.
Where is it? I can't see it.
Is that it? Out above?
Or is it up there? Or is it over here out of the picture?
Maybe it is. Let's see. Do you have it at the
I think it's over here out of the picture on the
Okay.
left.
Yeah, okay, let's go to the next slide, see if we have that picture of it. Yeah, there it is. There's the boat, the Esquif Pocket Canyon wrapped around a rock. We'll show you later the damage that happened. One of the center thwart broke out, and some of the gear still strapped into different parts of the canoe came floating out. There's still gear trapped underneath as well.
Mhm.
Go ahead. So why did it wrap? And this is what we just talked about. So Jesse was upset and distracted and not able to focus on what was happening immediately in front of their canoe, maybe looking downstream and not in front. And we talked earlier, this was a heavily loaded boat and a big boat, and maneuvering, making quick maneuvers under those circumstances with that kind of boat is just not possible.
No.
So I think
Yeah.
the big boat coupled with the mindset at the time is why this happened.
Mhm.
Okay, Nick? Oh, you're muted. Gotcha.
So the initial recovery efforts, again, Jesse seemed to be physically okay. And so that was established, and seeing that we were just downstream of our camp, even though we got kind of a choppy start, time was on our side because we were all fresh. There was a lot of people that were opinionated on, what to do, and there was a lot of different conversations going on, especially to Richard, about what should be done. But ultimately, we all agreed that the water was just too deep and it was too fast to walk out there. So we agreed that the kayak should go out and try to hook a line on. And so that was our first plan. So that's me headed out. I have a carabiner. On the first attempt, had a carabiner hooked to my the release ring in the back of my PDF. And once we get out there, I got behind the boat. Okay. It was very boily and unstable. And between keeping a rudder in the water and trying to unhook the beaner at the same time from behind me was just a mess. And so I don't know how long I was out there. It could have been 5 minutes. It could have been 15 minutes, but it just wasn't working out, making the move quick enough. So we actually I came back to shore, and we put the carabiner in a more convenient spot on the front of my kayak, and then I went back out, and I'd say within 5 minutes I was at a point where I could grab part of the boat and keep a rudder in and unhook the carabiner and get it on one end of the boat. I'm not sure if it was the bow or the stern, but the strong part with the loop on it. And so that's great. We have a line on the boat. But then we all came back to shore and just tried to use muscle to get the boat moving, but that just wasn't working. So we decided to try a different angle with the rope. So I actually ended up going back out a third time and unhooking the line from one end and hooking it on the other end of the boat. Once again, I'm not sure if it was bow or stern, but I do know we moved the line to the other end of the boat.
So when you guys first pulled, did you pull on the end that's closer to the river left bank that you're on? And when you
Yes.
pulled the second time, you pulled on the end that's more on the river right side?
Correct.
Okay. I think we have stuff here. You already said most of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I just want to point out that this is a skill worth practicing. Getting a line across current is not easy. Richard, will you talk to us about your Z-drag?
Well, it's kind of funny because even though I had practiced the Z-drag quite a lot and even got carried away and did computer simulations at one point. But in any event, I'd never used it on a river. Or use it in a real crisis, but I certainly knew how. Once the rigging got changed, we switched ends on the boat, and then I changed the angle, set an anchor around some shrubs or small trees, and then once that happened, everything went pretty fast. People did what I kind of was making the calls, and people did what I asked them to do. And a couple of us managed the Prusix, and that part of it went really very, very well. I thought it took a few bites to get enough tension. The rope's somewhat stretchy before we actually got the boat loose, but sure enough, the boat came loose.
Mm-hmm. And it's an example of what happens if people will accept a leader. right? Like let someone lead you.
Yes.
Mhm. And here's the boat swinging into shore. Ah. Not sure why I put this here. But this is a slide again from Trip Kinney. And what we're working on is the post-mortem. Why did this happen? But for next time, if you know that you might pin a boat, you might plan ahead and practice the skills necessary and have the equipment on hand, right? And you guys did some of that. You did enough of a pre-mortem to have the ingredients of a Z-drag already on the trip, right? You already knew you might need that.
It's
So-
mandatory equipment per the
Yeah.
river.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this slide actually because the intramortem is the hardest. It's kind of the last piece to fall into place when it comes to managing complications on trips, because that's the heat of the moment. Intramortem, that's like while it's happening. And so when you first had the pinned boat, you had some people that were louder and you had a lot of things going on, and after a few attempts everybody settled down and accepted Richard's leadership. But in the beginning the intramortem was a little more complicated and harder to deal with, and the communication is probably the most important part and the hardest part to do. Oh, so this is a modified Trip Kinney slide. I added the why we practice to the high frequency or high risk, low frequency event. So a high risk event is one with a chance of a large loss, right? And low frequency means it doesn't happen very often. So we don't very often wrap a canoe as thoroughly as that one was wrapped, right? We don't often stuff a raft all the way under a cliff. It doesn't happen on every trip, thank goodness. But when it does, if you already have thought ahead about those kinds of events and have a plan and have the right equipment and have systems, then you have a better chance of being able to respond. And the discretionary time versus the non-discretionary time, if the boat is pinned, you have time. But if there was a person stuck in that boat, you would have no time at all. So you don't have time for that intramortem freak out. Right? You don't have time for the shouting and the disagreements about how to do it. You need to get your best leader on point and execute a solution very quickly. And that's much harder to do. So when you look at low risk events, it doesn't really matter much because the risk is small. And then if you get over here on the high frequency side, well, this is the stuff that happens all the time. And so on your high frequency events, the real trick is to not get complacent, to not get used to it so much that you don't even bother to be prepared for it. So anyway. Ah, yes, the canoe repair.
Yeah, so let me back up a little bit. So the Z-drag was able to get the boat off the rock and to shore. And Nick and I went down to the boat and untied the gear and handed it up to people on shore. And then Sonia and I jumped in the boat and it popped back into shape. That's the beauty of Royal X and this T-Formex material. What did happen is the center thwart had broken out of the gunnels. So that's a major stabilizer for a canoe. So what happened was some of the gear people carried down the trail to the bottom eddy, and we left a little bit of gear in the boat, and Jesse and I got in the boat as a tandem boat in the condition it was in and paddled it through Triplet Falls down to that eddy. And then what we did to repair the boat is we took this center thwart that you can see here in the picture and pushed it back up to the top of the gunnels. It had broken out of the gunnel on the left side of the picture, and on the bottom right, the gunnel had broken just in front of it. But we wedged the thwart back in and squeezed the boat together so it squeezed against the thwart. And then we wrapped two straps, one in front, one behind the thwart, all the way around the hull of the boat to squeeze that thwart into place. And then we wrapped straps around the two straps and the thwart to hold it in place, front and back, side to side. And it felt really good. So we put all the gear back in, strapped it down, and continued on with the boat in that condition. And
It's amazing.
spoiler alert, it made it the rest of the way.
Unbelievable. The thwart didn't pop out.
No, it stayed just like you see the repair here.
Mhm.
It was pretty amazing.
And for me, this is the slide that gives you a sense of the width of the boat. Those two buckets, you know about how big those are, and there's plenty of room on either side of them.
Yeah, it's a good size. It's a tandem boat.
Yeah.
It can hold a lot of gear.
Yeah. I wonder too about the width of it in the middle, you know, sitting in a solo in the center of the boat. It's so wide there, it might be really hard to paddle it from there.
Right. What Jesse did, which a canoeist needs to do, is sit further back from center and use gear to offset their weight towards the front.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So now we're heading to the biggest rapid on the river, which we were still supposed to hit the previous day, and we just had the canoe pin. So now we're running really late on day 3. And we're pretty exhausted and stressed from that recovery. So we had to figure out Hell's Half Mile with the big rock it's in the center. It's called Lucifer Rock. You can see it here. All the water runs to Lucifer. And so we stopped and we scouted. And what was decided, because we already had enough carnage for the day, and actually down below Lucifer is it's a long rock garden. So it's not super difficult, but it is long. So a swim at Lucifer would be really nasty down below unless you had good safety. And that was our problem. Barry wanted to get his raft down past Lucifer through the garden, and there's a big eddy down on River Left. And it was decided that that's what he would do. And I think we had some safety set up on some rocks out towards Lucifer just in case. But Barry made it through just fine. He did well. And then one of the inflatable kayak passengers decided to walk, but Don in the inflatable kayak and Nick took that through and did a fantastic job. They just sped through that thing. And Nick took his kayak through, and he was poetry in motion, watching him catch every eddy and go through that. But we 3 canoeists decided that we had enough carnage for the day. Let's portage. Let's not take any risks, because that swim through that boulder garden would be nasty, and we just could not set up proper safety if there was an accident. So we went out to River Right and parked our boats, got all the gear out, hauled the gear down below Lucifer Rock, went back up, carried our boats down, reloaded our boats, and then we paddled through the rock garden with no issues and met the rest of the crew down at the River Left eddy. So now we're really late. We're tired, and we're not going to make it to our next designated camp either. So we paddle down a little ways, and we find the most beautiful sandbar to camp on. And we all decide, absolutely, it's not a designated campsite, which means there's no problem with people coming in expecting to have it to themselves. It was perfect. It really helped take the stress off for that evening. So that's what we did.
I wish you guys had pictures of that beach.
Yeah, I think we did have one somewhere, but anyway. It was
I
beautiful.
didn't see it anyway. It sounds delightful.
It was nice. Yeah, go ahead, next slide.
You want the next one?
Yeah. So we're at this beautiful beach camp, and the next morning the plan is that the group is going to go down to Jones Hole, which is the camp we were supposed to have, I think. And we were going to hike. There's a beautiful hike up there, several miles, and it goes past a small waterfall and up to a much bigger one. That's a lot of fun. And that was the plan. Well, apparently Jesse was feeling like they just wanted to take care of their gear. Some of their gear was still wet and they wanted to air it out. And it was a nice sunny day. But Jesse wanted to just get to the next camp and not stop at Jones Hole. And apparently, rather than talking about this with the group, they made this decision and told one person in the group. that person told me, and I got a little bit livid because the regulations say you do not separate from your group. And there are consequences if you are caught separating from your group, let alone the safety issues that that brings up. Besides the fact that Jesse's in a repaired canoe. And there were still some class 2 rapids to go through. But I got in Jesse's face and said, it's not okay for you to go alone. And at the time I thought that Richard, as the permit holder, would get a fine. And I said, if he gets a fine, you have to pay it. And they actually agreed, but still intended to leave the group. But what I learned later, it's actually worse. If you leave your group, the trip leader gets a penalty where they cannot even apply for permits for I don't know how many years after that an
Oh,
incident.
wow.
Yeah, it's not pretty. So that was absolutely inappropriate, let alone not bringing in the whole group. So there was more strife again that morning, but we went down to Jones Hole. Jesse took off by themselves to go down to the next camp, and the rest of us, couple of us, laid around at the Jones Hole camp to just chill and de-stress while the rest of us went hiking up the trail for our own de-stressing. And we had a great time on the hike. We found the waterfalls and it was a blast.
It looks like you had fun.
Yeah, it was nice. That water was cold.
It must have been.
But it's a gorgeous hike. And Jones Hole is a nice campsite, but it's at that water level, it was extremely muddy getting into it.
Oh, good to
But
know.
it was worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Richard.
Well, I think, here I'm kind of focusing on the emotions and to some degree as trip leader, I was taking the brunt of some of this, but the problem started the first night in camp when we were being criticized about how we operate our trips. Obviously, the accident produces a lot of stress, emotional exhaustion, physical exhaustion, which caused us to, stop early-ish. And then some people were very unhappy because they were concerned that we were camping in a group campsite that might have belonged to somebody else. But in any event, that just increased the strife level. Jay continued to criticize us. Then you have a second accident, which added more stress and unhappiness. And then when Jay was unwilling to stay with the group, that kind of just shows the level of breakdown. So I would say a general increase in negative emotions and resentment as the trip went on. In fact, I had trouble sleeping night 3, so.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds hard. Oh, this is sort of a summary. So that was an emotional summary. And this is a summary of what were the actual hazards that you guys encountered. And I had a couple of these on the not present list. And then I realized that, yeah, the water probably was cold. Were you guys wearing dry suits? No dry
No.
suits. Was it so cold that you were in danger if you swam?
No.
No, okay.
Not-
Maybe cold water doesn't belong on this trip, but the undercut wall was there.
Oh, absolutely.
And the untested 2 people on the cataract, and also the untested solo paddling of the tandem boat. And the group member that you guys didn't know very well didn't turn out to be very sympathetic or compatible. And communications with that individual didn't work out very well. And then the solo boating is one of the things listed in the top causes of fatal accidents by AW. So in addition to being against the rules, it's dangerous. In spite of all this, you guys did good. You made it down the river. You didn't lose anybody. The main thing you lost was the enjoyment, the peace of mind, the good night's sleep. Which is it's a painful loss because it's your vacation. Right? Yeah. Oh, well, thank you guys so much for telling that story. I know it's a little hard to come out in public with a story that's that difficult. But it helps us all to see, how it can go. And maybe will prevent people from having the thing that I call the optimism bias, which is it'll be fine. Well, maybe it won't be. And this is just me, and I invite you guys to chime in if you have thoughts. But all the slides from here out are things that I wanted to mention. When we think about leadership, there are a lot of different ways that a person can be a leader on a river trip. The permit holder is cast into a leadership position automatically, but they can delegate some or all of those responsibilities except for that of holding the permit. Trip leader usually does, camps and sort of overall logistics. River leader usually is the one in front on the river, making sure people know where to go. The sweep is leading, even though they're in the back, because they're helping to keep everybody moving towards the goal, whatever the goal is of the trip. Rescue leader is the person, Richard turned out to be the rescue leader who was needed to get the canoe off of the rock because he knew how to set up a Z-drag and had the engineer's brain to know the angles and get it done. And not everybody would be able to do that. In paddling clubs, we often avoid the word leader or leadership because of the fear of liability. And so in our club, we call this person a trip coordinator. And in the Poudre paddlers, it's a trip host. This is the person who's, suggesting a trip and bringing it together, but they're not called a leader. And then I added opposition leader as kind of a joke because on Grand Canyon trips or any really long multi-day trip, you can have enough people that disagree with the primary leader to actually form a contingent that has a different idea, a different plan, and maybe a separate political party. And so you could have an opposition leader, which you hope you don't, but bigger groups have this problem more often. A sort of a survey of all my reading over the last few months about leadership. The best leaders are the ones that have a very clear goal and they're able to communicate that with everybody so everybody knows what it is, and the leader's sure about their goal. They have the ability to see all of the components and pieces and parts of their goal, so they have the big picture vision and an understanding of each and every variable that adds up to it. And they also are flexible enough to be able to change plans, and they have contingency plans. Recognizing high stakes decisions is a very important characteristic for a leader, but I think it's something we all need a little training on. I have a slide about high stakes decisions coming up. The Myers-Briggs personality inventory, it's a test you can take that tells you something about who you are. And they've discovered that on the thinking to the feeling spectrum, the people that are more on the thinking side tend to be better at being leaders because they're more able to make unpopular decisions. People who are more feelers are more susceptible to other people's opinions and less likely to make the hard decisions that sometimes have to be made. But the communication skills are obviously very important, and it really helps a lot if the leader knows themselves well enough that they're not trying to hide anything. They're able to say, look, I'm good at this and I'm not good at that. Can you help me? Will you please, do this thing that I'm not good at? And that's perfect. And also the empathy enough to be able to teach people without making them feel lesser than, and also to allow everyone to contribute what they have, because we all have strengths, and a really good leader will harness the strengths of each and every individual in the group and use them for everyone's benefit. Kind of a very broad overview, official versus informal leadership, like a trip coordinator on a club trip. Is that an official leader? Not really. That's kind of an informal leader. And then a crisis leader versus a non-crisis leader. Well, the crisis leader has a really intense job to do because there's a time limit And there's probably loud people who are trying to confound the process. So we've seen all six of these options in this story you guys have told. Don't you think? I mean, when the canoe pin, the loudest leaders got the first tries at getting the canoe off, and then the most effective actually got the canoe off. And yeah.
Go Richard.
Yeah, go Richard. So I think that, I mean, I've been asking this question for some time, is should clubs even do multi-day trips? But you guys do it all the time. And most of the time it goes pretty well. And you
Yes.
have permit parties where all the club members get together and apply for permits. And you have agreements for, you can go on this trip. If you also apply for the permit, I get the permit and you don't, then you're invited. So this is a challenge because it doesn't allow you to do all the group selection stuff we were talking about.
Oh, it
Right?
still does. I mean, they have first right of refusal, but then we still look at their qualifications and experience, and still we will turn them away if they're not appropriate.
True.
Okay.
If we know they're not appropriate ahead of time.
Right? Yeah. How do you find out if somebody has like a personal problem or a personality issue that would make them difficult on a trip? You basically just have to spend time with them and spend time with people that they spend time with.
Yeah, and that's very tough, because unless somebody comes out of the woodwork, I mean, we might call somebody and ask them, hey, I hear you paddled with so-and-so, what do you think? And they might be willing to tell us about their paddling ability, but not their personality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I-
So you
you know-
guys you're doing this very careful team selection in spite of the fact that you're doing the permit party system.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, what this whole story led me to look into was a more bureaucratic way of determining who's competent to go on a given trip. And the Hoofers is a paddling club based out of Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, associated with the university, that has a rating system for leaders and a rating system for participants. And it's very bureaucratic. And I've been talking to people about it, and some people just positively hate it. But the Hoofers, the people who have come through the Hoofers program, are a bunch of really good paddlers with excellent safety consciousness, and they're still friends 30 years later. So what does that tell you? It's working. So this is what happens if you call 911. Right? You get incident command. It's totally bureaucratic. They immediately take any power away from you. Even if you're a paddler capable of going right out there and grabbing something, they'll be like, nope, don't go out there. We're in charge now. So as soon as you call 911 and bring in the authorities, you're into their bureaucracy and you have no power. But on the river, we have this state, and this is a new word to me. This is from Trip Kinney. This is communitas, is the way that we operate in non-commercial paddling, where everybody is more or less equal. And it doesn't matter how important or unimportant a person you are in the rest of your life on the river. It's all just about, we're in this together and we're working together towards our goal, and you have the skills that you have. And a rite of passage, and the rite of passage being running rivers, right, is how we determine who we're going to go with. So without a bureaucracy, the most power that a trip leader ever has is in choosing who to take on their trip. I would say. Do you guys agree with that?
Oh, yeah, I 100% that the right choice of your group is probably the most important thing.
Yeah.
Can be complicated if your permit holder is not the same as your trip leader and doesn't quite understand the magnitude of the decisions you're making about who can go with you on a trip. That can complicate things.
Mm-hmm. And it matters a lot more when the trip gets big. The bigger the trip is, the harder it is to have a simpatico group.
definitely.
Yeah. So what do you guys think of rites of passage that we could use for qualifiers?
Boy,
Well, one thing I like to do before big trips is at least go paddle with some.
yeah, I don't, I
Move
guess,
on regular.
Teresa, you and I had talked about, this before, and I just wouldn't know how to possibly implement that in our club.
Right? Yeah, it's harder. The club structure makes it harder.
Yeah, but on the flip side, yes, we're using this example here tonight, but this is really, out of all the years I've been paddling and on trips, I've really only had 2 trips. One was not a club trip where there was strife with not just paddling technical problems. Those are actually very few, but personal problems.
Mhm.
The vast majority are great.
Yeah. I used to work in the Grand Canyon business. I worked for professional river outfitters for 7 years. And I used to be sometimes the person that would drive down to Diamond and pick up groups afterwards. And the first question is always, how did it go? And about half the time, the trips have some major conflict. Like, it's pretty common. But that's a longer trip and a bigger group.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
One of the 2 I just mentioned, the non-club trip was a Grand Canyon trip.
Yeah, it's so much of a bigger challenge because, people can behave for a week, but for 3 weeks is much harder.
Mhm. Yes.
So when we're talking about, huh?
Teresa, I don't know if you saw Brian's question, but he asked a good one.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Did the many different styles of paddlecraft potentially add to the group issues? Like if you're all a crew of kayakers, or you're all a crew of canoeists, like you guys had, rafts, you had hard shell kayaks, you had canoes, like, so to some degree, you didn't have a shared understanding among the paddlers about what it even meant to paddle the crafts that they were in, right? Do you think that contributed in any way?
I don't think so. No, I don't. I really didn't think so. But of course, the thing I always notice is that the rafts are just slower. They're slower to pack up and they're slower on the river.
Yeah. I mean, I have an opinion about that for sure, and Deborah already knows it. Because I have done a lot of rowing and I've done a lot of trips with rafts in them, but after having done a bunch of self-support trips with no rafts, I really much prefer it when there's not a raft around, because then nobody gets to put their stuff on the raft, and there's not the temptation to bring all the extra stuff that Richard mentioned, and we end up with a more egalitarian and a smoother and more cohesive group. And that's not that rafts are bad. Like, I love to row, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Debbie?
I'm sorry, I was answering a chat question.
Oh, okay. I was just asking about the whole multiple different kinds of crafts. Does it impact the flavor of the trip?
No, I would say not. The only thing that Richard already mentioned is you need to take into account that rafts take longer to rig and de-rig and go down the river. But no, I've been on many multi-craft trips and they've been great. We did the San Juan last year. It was a blast. We had rafts and canoes and IKs, and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just as long as you know ahead of time that that's going to happen, you need to make allowances for that.
Fair enough. Nick, anything to add?
Just, you just emphasized how the carrot was dangled in front of me, so I could be kind of more in a play situation.
Right.
He said, hey, I'll carry your food, I'll carry everything you need, and you just have a blast in your hard shell, and like, okay,
And who's going to say no?
So, yeah, but I agree. If it's a true self-support trip, I can see how everybody being in the same craft could move things along more efficiently, for sure, because we're all in the same mindset.
Yeah. And, me being a kayaker, I've done a lot of trips with a bunch of canoes, and sometimes I've done trips in a canoe myself. And canoes and kayaks have different strengths. So again, if you have a really windy day, it's not fair to the canoes. Sorry,
You're right. There was
they
a,
suffer.
yeah, there was a comment on the chat where somebody had the heaviest boat, an 11-foot canoe, and had difficulty navigating around the lighter boats. And that's something I've moderated for myself. I've learned that when you're approaching a rapid, you don't get close to a lighter boat or a kayak, especially a kayak, because they love to back paddle and slow way down as they're coming up to that rapid. And canoes will just come right on top of them. So I leave lots of space.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that, Steve.
Yeah, good question. And I can't see the chat when I'm screen sharing. So if you guys
Right.
bring up anything that comes along the chat, that would be great.
Yeah,
Yep.
Teresa, there are a couple of chats that are applicable to the choosing the group. And one of them says that if you should be asking for giving them information about the specific river that you're going down, or you're going to go down, and making sure that they understand exactly what they're in for. And then the responses they give, if there's something about that person that's not going to be a good fit because of their skill level, the person who did the chat said that it's a good thing to keep that confidential. Don't start rumors. It's personal information about them that they might not want to have shared. And then another person said that one of the most important things in group selection in his estimation, and he's done many multi-day trips, is to really gauge the person's, to see if the person is simpatico with the rest of the group. And that, they wouldn't not consider that in their evaluation of inviting that person. So those are two things that came up in chats that I saw about group selection.
Yeah, good comments.
I have another comment, actually.
Yeah.
That is the can't remember the name of the last rapid that the 3 canoes portage. In my
Hell's Half
experience,
Mile?
what, excuse me?
Hell's Half Mile?
No, below that. It was the next day, I believe, or farther down.
When we portaged.
The 3 canoes portaged and everybody else ran down and the 3 canoes portaged.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That was
whichever rapid it was, that's a big deal to portage the gear and 3 canoes. My experience on trips that require portages is that everybody should stick together. Somebody could trip and fall. Anything could happen on a portage. Plus, the other people who weren't portaging could help out on the portage and make everything go more smoothly and faster. Just a bit of postmortem.
Sure. Yeah. If your group is tight, that's more likely to happen. Yeah. Okay. Ready to go on to the next thing? Paddling with peer groups. I think the most important point here is that if you're going to go on a trip with a group of peers, you're building consensus, and that's the whole communication ahead of time to make sure everybody knows about the river and knows about the style of paddling. Trip brought up the question, are you leading or are you mentoring or are you coaching? And the 3 things kind of overlap, and you can do all of them, but it might help you decide how to go about it. And there's a typo in here. You must help less experienced members with important choices. They might not even know whether they should go or not go, right? And it might be an easy enough run that they can go, but they won't know that. Or it might be a hard enough run that it's a really bad idea to go, and they might not know that. So some people will definitely need help with the decisions. And that's something that a good leader can do. And then, the whole issue of having a, person that doesn't fit, that's already on a trip, you can't remove them once they're on it, but can you remove them ahead of time? And, in my experience, a lot of times you can't. A lot of times the only choice you have is to remove yourself. If there's someone that, you think is going to cause problems, you may just not go on that trip. But for all of us, doing debriefs like this one help us to figure out what we're going to do next time and how we're going to do it better. And the AAR, the after action review, did we do what we meant to do? How did we do it? Why did it turn out the way it did? And what are we going to do to adapt our strategy? That's the skiers version of a debrief. And we're doing the paddlers version here. Here's some goals for us all when we're paddling with a bunch of peers. Talk about our goals. Make sure that we have the same goals before we leave home. And if there are roles that people can take, you're the map guy, you're the shuttle guy, you figure out the meals, whatever it is that you can delegate or have people that take on certain tasks, that helps everyone. Recognizing high stakes decisions, and I still haven't come up to that slide, but I know it's in here. Direct communication, trust, and developing trust takes spending time with each other, right? So go on trips before you get to the big trip. That's how I go about it for myself. Like when I get an opportunity to go on a multi-day trip, the people that get invited are the last people I paddled with, usually, because that's who I know is paddling well and, they're showing up and they get along with each other. And I already know that about them. Having empathy for people, using their competencies is what you do when you have the roles. Collaboration is the goal in the end. And if you have anyone that takes a leadership role, they have to listen to everyone and be fair. Fairness is super important, and delegate. Here it is, high stakes decisions, 2 components. And this is something that I need drilled into my head. Possible large loss and hard to turn back. If you have those 2 things, it's a high stakes decision and you need to stop, think about it, collect information, take your time and make the right decision. You don't rush through high stakes decisions. You make them carefully. And this is the end here, the bureaucratic option. I don't know if there's any Hoofers on the call that want to tell us about how you guys would do multi-day trip planning, given all of the ratings, but it's pretty cool. Here's the rating system that they use for paddlers. You have to swim 100 yards and then tread water for 5 minutes before you even get to start, before you get to go on a trip. And then you go on the lake and they make sure you've got the right gear and they make sure that you can get your craft to go in the right direction. And then they take you on the river and they start teaching you about eddies. And Maggie, who got me started inquiring about the Hoofers, she said she was a 3P. So she was comfortable on class 2 and beginning to roll. Yeah. Pretty useful system. Sometimes I think that we should do this in the canoe club or something like it.
Well, if you have, I'm one of those Hoofers and I was in charge of this for 5 years, or got 5 years as the water safety chair. I'm Dan.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, thanks. This is really fascinating talking about here in Utah on a ski trip. So I'm not even in Madison, but anyway, first of all, we don't do a lot of multi-day trips. So most of our paddling tend to be base camping and day trips. Although I had the good fortune one time to score a Selway permit and led a trip with the club down that. And but the rating system, it came about because there was rafting, just a small raft on a river back in the 60s, I think it was, where there was a fatality. And so they developed this water safety code, and the club is all volunteers, and it's all, it does seem cumbersome at times, and some people really kind of despise it, but it works. And we've had good luck throughout the years because it's all, people get promoted based on demonstrating skills, and leaders only are allowed to lead on trips at a level of difficulty, and they have to work up just the same way, so that we first give a leader rating just by taking a water safety test. It's kind of a written test, just explaining experience, and they work up from there. And we don't have that many paddlers in a club who are do the R4, but most of our club trips have tended to be class 2 and some 3. So it works, and it's so it's self-policing really, because for people to get promoted as a leader, they have to be recommended and then discussed by a water safety board that's composed of the intermediate and advanced leaders, and they vote on that promotion. So I'll stop there, but I welcome questions or comments. I think you might have a couple other hoofers on the call too, and maybe even the current water safety chair, Caroline Rose, but anyway.
Well, Dan, when they vote on promoting a leader, is it a majority rules, or do you have to reach consensus to promote someone?
Oh boy, I think it's a majority or 2/3.
Yeah.
But it's a closed door vote, and people discuss the leader, and sometimes when a leader isn't promoted, that we give them feedback about what needs to happen to improve and be promoted. And that usually doesn't happen because by the time they get nominated, people have seen them co-lead or lead under supervision, and they know them in the club and feel that they're ready for that kind of promotion.
Well, some people learn when they're given hard feedback. Way back at the beginning when I showed that slide of all the negative characteristics that a person could possibly have and make them hard to paddle with, the one where you can't tell them anything, that was me. When I first got into raft guiding, I couldn't be told anything. I knew it all. And somebody gave me the feedback that my bosses thought I couldn't be told anything, and so I couldn't learn. And I was like, wait a minute, that's a problem. So some people will, take the hard feedback and learn from it.
Yeah. And as far as paddler skill ratings, they don't always, sometimes people feel like they should be promoted, and a leader who's been on a trip with them has observed something that just they don't quite have the skills and experience yet to get that promotion. And sometimes the paddlers take it a little hard, but ultimately, they keep working on it, and they generally progress.
Yeah, I would like to see that. I mean, what I see here in our area is people get to where they've run a few class 3s and made it to the bottom alive, and they think they want to be running class 4 when actually they can't surf a wave, can't surf a hole, can't peel out very well yet, and they don't have the skills at all. But if you shove them off at the top of a class 4, they might make it to the bottom. And that does not make them a class 4 paddler. So what this rating system does is make it really clear what skills you need for each level.
Yeah, and something I've seen from some good friends of mine who were active paddlers in clubs out east. One of their clubs had developed, I think this was a Pennsylvania, I can't remember the name of the club, but they had someone had developed a really great self-assessment tool that just took people through and asked them, okay, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? And, just answer honestly. And at the end of it, it would spit out, well, you're good for running class 2 or 3, whatever. But
yeah, I made one of those. I'll share it with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think because there's a lot, I've been paddling 40 plus years, and I've seen a lot of changes, and things are a lot different these days, and people, both boats and techniques, and they think if they make it down a class 3 rapid, they're a class 3 paddler, and boy, and they like to.
It's a dangerous assumption.
Yes, it's very dangerous, and the paddle porn, the extreme paddling, people aspire to just run the NAR, and
sure.
They might. And let's face it, some of the boats today make it survivable, but boy, it's dangerous stuff when you start just being the Mountain Dew paddlers just huck the big stuff, and that's all they want to do.
Right. Can't catch an eddy, but I can boof off that. Because I'm in a nirvana.
Yeah.
I think I'm through all my slides. Let me see. Ah, yes, a quote from the master, Jim Snyder. The very best way to affect an outcome of an event is through its beginning. Thank you for joining us for this talk. Thank you, Debbie and Richard and Nick, for telling your story and helping us think through all of these questions about how to run better trips. And if you're curious, that is the North Umpqua River. It's one that we do every year. It's in Oregon. And special thanks to these 5 people that I talked to before this talk that helped form some of my thinking, in addition to all the thinking that was provoked by Richard and Debbie and Nick. And the very bottom link that I have on this page, I finally found one that almost gives a sense of that undercut that the raft went under. It looks like there's a cobble bar and the water just slides sideways right into it. So, yeah. And the Rafters Did It Wrong at Triplet Falls video is fairly humorous. They all went in the cracks in between the rocks there. And I'm glad you guys are here, and thanks so much for joining us in the Lower Columbia Canoe Club for one more safety series. We'll do it again.
I just want to add my thank you to the panelists, to Debbie, to Richard, and to Nick, and Teresa, as always, for organizing our talks. If you were with us at the top of the hour, you know that our next talk is coming up in 2 weeks. We're going to dissect our life jackets, see what's in them and what should be in them, and talk about times that you wished you'd had something in your life jacket when you were on the river but didn't. So we'll see everybody in 2 weeks. And we'll hang out for a few seconds or a few minutes, just in case folks have lingering questions for our panelists, but it's getting late, so thank you for joining us.
I want to say hi, Jenny. You can turn off the recording now.
Oh. And Teresa, there was a request in the chat to post the links that you had on that last slide. Can you post them into the chat?
Yeah, let me go find them. I'll do that.
The other thing that we also always do is we share the link to the recorded talk. So if you can't find them quickly, Teresa, anybody who was registered for the talk will get the presentation.
Okay, well, I'm doing it. It's just going to take me a moment or two to just like